All right, welcome to the March 30th Tougie's Take podcast, the final episode for the month of March. Today's episode's brought to you by caffeine. Caffeine, can't live with it, can't live without it. Tougie, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. I mean, it's kind of crazy that we're almost to the end of March already. The next episode will be our lovely, updated season awards and everything, but I mean, last week was great with Architect, letting him kind of bare his soul on the Sabres, but I'm kind of glad now that it's just the two of us talking puck.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a significantly more uplifting episode. I think maybe we'll just get the bad news out of the way. Buffalo blew a 3-0 lead last night to Philadelphia in what can only be described as a real bait and switch for the hopes of all Sabres fans.
I mean, we were going to talk about this later. We could talk about it now if you want to. You know what? We started off last week's episode with shitting on the Sabres for nearly an hour.
It's tradition.
Let's give any Sabres fan listening to this a chance, just a chance at maybe possibly enjoying this week's show. Although, DeJ, I should say,
hey, just in case you haven't opened up the newspaper this morning, we'll save the news. In case you missed the game.
You ruined my excellent segue of saying what is likely to be the first of two shows this week. I believe this is the week, starting by popular demand, everybody. And there is one particular story that we'll get into a little bit later on as well that really kind of spurned this. But Deej and I are sick and tired of recording a show on Tuesday just to have crazy stuff happen on Tuesday night that we don't get to talk about for a week. So I believe, Deej, let me know if I'm wrong, that the tentative plan is for a show on Tuesday and Friday now, 2 a week, so that we can be more up to date with some stuff. And that way, if an officiating controversy happens, we're not an entire week too late to the conversation.
Yeah, right.
So,
well,
with that,
well, now that we're a semi-weekly podcast, that's how it is, right? It's semi-weekly because I don't know. I don't shop at Victoria's Secret, so I don't really understand how this works.
This is the intro now.
All right, and we're back.
Yeah.
I guess we'll start with some VQs, some viewer questions.
We didn't get to have
Guntus.
this segment last week, so we packed it a little bit this week. So we do have a lot to talk about in general, but yeah, we wanted to get more viewer questions in there. So Deej, kick us off. What do we got?
All right, my boy Sergachev. He asked a question on the Discord. All right, here we go.
Here's the prep.
So David Amber asks Anthony Stewart, former Thrasher, and Elliot Friedman at the intermission who they think has the best defense in the North Division. Apparently, they both answered the Canadiens. Who has the best D in the North Division?
So, you had no time to prep for this question. I went extremely in depth with my research on this. Would you like to give your opinion before I break down the defense cores of the 7 teams in the North Division?
I mean, it's gotta be Winnipeg. There's no way it's not Winnipeg.
Who's to say?
I mean, Because, I'm including the goalie as a member of the defense.
Okay, so I didn't do that. I just looked at the six defensemen that played the most games so far.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's got to be either Montreal or Winnipeg. It can't be Toronto. I don't know. Yeah, let's break it down.
Let's break it down. Toogie's Take, North Division Defense Corps Edition, number 7. The worst top 6 defensemen in the North Division belongs to the Edmonton Oilers. Controversial as it may be, the Oilers defense absolutely sucks. And allow me to explain.
I mean,
although Deej, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say they've got that guy. His last name's Bear. They've got Donovan McNabb's nephew.
All right.
I think case in point, they sound great.
So allow me to explain. Darnell Nurse, great offensively. He is atrocious in his own zone.
Some would say he could quarterback a power play.
Some would say. Tyson Barrie, he's had a good bounce back after leaving Toronto. He's still good offensively, abysmal defensively. William Lagesson, good defensively, great on the PK, still not all that good. Average, probably slightly below average. Adam Larson, slightly above average, still good defensively. His offense has fallen off, which isn't saying much because his offense wasn't that good to begin with. Chris Russell is atrocious, but he's still okay defensively. And then Ethan Bear, decent, slightly below average. You know, I was looking at certain numbers, point totals, the analytics side of things, and this season, I think the only guy that you can say in terms of a well-rounded, mainly I guess the analytical side of things with WAR and everything, the only guy who's above average is Adam Larson. Everybody else is atrocious, and I don't know how to explain it because their goaltending with Mike Smith is relatively decent. So I don't know what is up with these defensive numbers. Caleb Jones could be a bit of an X factor. He's around that average level, but yeah, I don't think people realize that Darnell Nurse's impact on the game defensively overrides what he does offensively, even though he does a lot offensively. Edmonton's defense corps, upon further inspection, is easily the worst in the North Division, in my opinion.
Well, you bring up Adam Larson, and I know we shit on Peter Chiarelli a lot, but did you know he has more goals than Taylor Hall this year?
Hockey is...
Because that's looking like a steal.
Hockey is so cruel sometimes. Oh, my God. Anyway, that Edmonton talk aside.
So Oilers are last.
I do have Edmonton last. Second bottom, the Vancouver Canucks. It's relatively close, but the fact that Alex Edler has had a bit of an underrated return to form offensively. He's still, approaching good territory, certainly above average. Nate Schmidt's in the same territory. It's been a rough debut year in Vancouver, but he's still solid offensively. You have Quinn Hughes as well, who's had a brutal second year. He's regressed across the board, but he's still an offensive play driver and right in that mix with Edler and Schmidt. So those three kind of help keep this defense afloat, because then you get into Travis Hamonic, which, yikes. His offense is dropping off. It's still okay. His defense is getting better, but still is very bad. So it shows you how bad it was getting in Calgary. He's not great. Even worse, Jordy Ben, better than he was last year, but still awful. So yikes. He's still good on the PK, though. And then Tyler Myers, who is one of the worst defensemen in the North Division. Arguably the worst. He's okay offensively. Defensively, it's abysmal. He might actually have the worst contract in the league. So looking at certain numbers, and on average here, Edler, Schmidt, and Hughes keep Vancouver in a decent spot. But those latter three, even though Hamonic hasn't played full-time, Chatfield and Levy have played a bit, but God, yeah, no, Vancouver's defense isn't that great either.
So I know this is I'm going to get some backlash for saying this on the podcast. I don't follow the Canucks very closely. They are just geographically
Nobody blames you.
So far away
Nobody blames you.
I know we brought this up in the season preview. Has Ollie Ulevi have his injury problems returned? Because he is a guy that should be like a stud defenseman, but he always finds a way to break a weird bone.
I don't know what's going on with him right now, admittedly, because, I mean, much like you, I haven't paid that much attention to Vancouver because why the hell would I? But, I mean, maybe. It's tough to say. I mean, in terms of like how well he's done this season, I didn't really hear too many Canucks fans complain. But, yeah, weird spot.
Yeah, I remember in January he scored like his first career goal. I'll do some research on this. I'll give a Ulevi update on Friday. That's what I'll do.
In fifth place, I have the Winnipeg Jets. And this surprised me.
Okay. This is fascinating.
This surprised me as well. Do
they just have Neil and no one else?
It's Neil and one other guy. Shockingly, now I was going off of, again, the 6 defensemen that played the most games, and right now on Cap Friendly, Winnipeg's top pairing is Josh Morrissey and Tucker Poolman, who are both surprisingly atrocious. And specifically with Josh Morrissey, he's okay offensively. His defensive metrics have never been great, and they're still horrible. And he's someone else on a rough contract, DeJ. I don't know. Take a shot in the dark at Josh Morrissey's contract.
Oh, God. Is he making over 5?
Yes.
I feel like... Is his contract as bad as Anton Strawman's? Strawman's making 5.5 for 2 more years.
Oh, it's worse. Josh Morrissey is 25 years old, so we'll see. But he is making $6.3 million for the next 8 years. This is year 1 of 8. And
oh, God,
from an analytics standpoint,
last year that they paid him for.
From an analytics standpoint, he is the worst of Winnipeg's top 6 defensemen this season so far. Is it the role that they're playing him in? Maybe. But I was shocked to see this. Like, Tucker Poolman as well is right around that. He is in that pure abysmal territory. His defense is better than it was last year, but it's still horrific. He's played way above his role, and I think Jets fans could admit that too. But yeah, I was shocked. Like, you look at Morrissey and Pullman's numbers defensively, it's bad. In terms of the second pairing, like Derek Forbort's like a slightly above average defenseman still. Like, he's regressing, but he's still solid defensively. And then you get to Neil. Good old Neil, who was in my opinion, good territory, right?
Neil Pell.
Great offense. His defense is improving a bit, so... Neil is solid. Logan Stanley, who scored his first NHL goal this past week, he's okay. He's below average, better defensively, which isn't surprising. He's very sheltered, though, with his usage. And then you get to the best defenseman on the team, and it's Dylan DeMello, who is fantastic. And he was signed to like a $3 million 3x4 or 4x3. He's dropping off a bit, but Dylan DeMello, who was one of the most underrated defensemen last year, continues to be one of the most underrated defensemen, and I have him as Winnipeg's best defenseman so far this year in terms of an all-around, aspect. But all in all, it's shocking to see kind of the defenses here that we're seeing. You have 2 playoff teams in my bottom 3 from an individual statistical standpoint. Now, of course, you can sit there and talk about the systems they play in, the goaltenders, and why they are where they are. But if you look at the individuals, yeah, bottom 3, Edmonton, Vancouver, and Winnipeg.
Holy cow. So
the top 4, should we go to them?
I'm going to guess that the Flames are, I'm going to guess that I may have underrated the Flames here is what I'm thinking, but I don't want you to spoil anything. Who's number 4?
Number 4, I disagree with David Amber and Mr. Stewart. We have the Montreal Canadiens at number 4. Again,
interesting.
On Cap Friendly right now, Joel Edmondson, who is abysmal. And he's improved this year, and he's still abysmal. Big yikes. Shea Weber, above average. His offense is dropping off despite some good metrics. His defense is bouncing back. Shea Weber is still a very useful NHL defenseman, but he's not up, in these higher levels anymore. Then shockingly, you get Brett Kulak, who is absolutely up there. Arguably, from an analytical standpoint, a play driving standpoint, better than Jeff Petrie. Arguably. Brett Kulak, a very underrated defender.
Really?
And then you get to Jeff Petrie, who is obviously still great. He's great offensively. The defense is down a little bit, but obviously with Jeff Petrie right now, like he is riding a bender where he is just putting up points at an unbelievable pace. So that's not to sit here and say, Brett Kulak's better than Jeff Petrie. I'd rather have him than Jeff Petrie. But, you know, again, from an analytical standpoint, that just goes to show that, hey, Jeff Petrie's great. And right now on Cap Friendly, he's on a line with Brett Kulak. So, you know, who's the straw that stirs the drink there? Who's to say? And then third pairing, you know, or at least it's not their active third pairing. But then you have Alex Romanov, who, you know, slightly below average, decent offensively so far. He's not bad. And then I believe he's currently injured, but they have Ben Sherratt, who is also in the horribad territory. And he's gotten better this year than like a 5-on-5 perspective, but he's still brutal. So again, you look at Kulak and Petrie are both great. Weber's solid. Romanov slightly below average, but then Edmondson and Sherratt just tank that defense. So it's not as bad of a situation where you have like someone who you think is like Josh Morrissey in Winnipeg, where it's like this guy needs to carry the weight. It's not that bad, but yeah, no, Montreal's outside of my top three, which is very controversial because that means there are two non-playoff teams in the top three.
Jeez. Also, Sherratt, if I'm not mistaken, he was one of the last few guys drafted as a Thrasher, which is, I don't know why. Fun Thrasher facts.
Now I need to look this up because there can never be enough Thrasher facts. Indeed, 4th round pick in 2009. So one of the penultimate draft for the Thrashers, because of course Winnipeg was back the next year. So.
Obviously slightly off topic before we get to the final three, but I'm always a little upset that Winnipeg didn't go with the Thrashers design for the reverse retro.
Yeah. No, I don't blame you. Fun fact.
Rad. All right.
The last draft pick in Atlanta Thrashers history, defenseman Peter Stoykowicz, who has one of my favorite names. So shout out to Peter. He never played an NHL game, but good on to Peter.
Hey,
boy, if you look at this 2010 draft class for the Thrashers, no wonder they moved.
It was the final nail in the coffin.
Oh my God. Well, let's segue. They took Alex Burmistrov 8th overall. He played almost 350 NHL games. That's cool. They didn't have a second round pick. They took Julian Melchiori in the 3rd round, who played 30 NHL games, so whatever. 4th round, they take Ivan Teligan, who didn't play an NHL game. 5th round, goaltender Frederick Pettersson-Wetzel, never played an NHL game. And Yassine Cisse.
That's such a good name.
Who never played an NHL game. 6th round, defenseman Kendall McFall, no NHL games. Forward Tanner Lane in the 6th round, no NHL games. And the 3rd pick of the 6th round, Sebastian Lance-Awuya, no NHL games. And in the 7th round, Peter Stoykowicz, no NHL games. Jesus Christ. Say what you want.
Can you imagine having 3 picks in that 6th round and
oh my God,
not getting Mark Stone?
Just the management. I've said it before. I feel so bad for Thrashers fans because that team was so brutally mismanaged on so many levels. It's unreal. That said,
well, they were the only reason they acquired players was for marketing. We'll get into that another time.
The top 3. Let's get, this is just the first question. I said the show was going to be shorter. Jesus. Number 3, the Ottawa Senators. And I can't believe it.
Really?
But here is why.
Thanks, good Branson.
Thomas Chabot is elite offensively. Elite. His defense went from bad to horribad, but Thomas Chabot, from an offensive standpoint, absolutely picked up the ball where Erik Karlsson had to drop it off. He's great. Then apparently he's on the top pairing with Nikita Zaitsev, who is the worst defenseman in the North Division. I'm not joking. He is undisputedly the worst division, or the worst defenseman in this division from the, I mean, God, what is basic math? What is basic math of the, oh my God, I'm blowing it. Of the 42 defensemen, technically 43 that I looked at, he is the worst by far. And he's actually gotten better offensively this year, but his defense off the cliff. But then from there, the most controversial player in the North Division is defenseman Mike Riley, who is a fantastic offensive play driver and okay defensively. But anytime you hear the name Mike Riley this season, it's because he has made a horrific defensive mistake and gotten completely torched. I compare him almost to Jake Gardiner, where Jake Gardiner, as Leafs fans will tell you, when he was on his game, he was pretty good. But you wouldn't often hear about him when he was on his game because everyone was waiting for that mistake that he'd make. And good God, when Jake Gardiner made mistakes. As a Bruins fan, I can tell you that. So yeah, Mike Riley's a really interesting case where I think he's the type of guy, if someone doesn't side on the analytics side of things, they'll be like, see, look, analytics say that Mike Riley's good, and I see him with my eyes. So that is what it is. But underrated. They signed a defenseman from the KHL this year named Artyom Zub. Regardless, he's fantastic defensively. Like, he's not going to get, and I think he's over the age limit, he's not going to get any shouts for Rookie of the Year or anything like that. But he's actually a really good defensive option. So that was a really good pickup for them. Then you get to Eric Brandstrom, who's just been meh, unfortunately. I mean, everyone, that whole story has been talked about a lot in terms of how well he fits in with the team.
Yeah.
He's not currently...
Well, they thought he was going to be the next Shabbat.
Right, and he's not currently playing. Right now it's Braden Coburn, who hasn't played enough to really kind of register for these metrics. And then the last guy, the sixth man, is Eric Branson, who, of course, is awful. Again, another instance of a player on this Ottawa team.
He's the Sean William Scott frontrunner.
It's another instance of a guy whose offense is...
I believe he is.
I think so too. Yeah, look that up. His offense has peaked a little bit. And again, his defense, any shred of defense he had left has just tanked. So, you know, is that in relation to the goaltending struggles? I mean, again, a lot of these stats don't necessarily look at those goaltending struggles. But yeah, Ottawa boosted big time, at least looking at the six individuals and kind of averaging it out. Ottawa's boosted big time by Shabbat, surprisingly Mike Riley, and Artyom Zub for sure. So I was very surprised at that.
I'll give the Sean William Scott trophy update after this little segment because it's worth mentioning. The race is actually fascinating right now.
Okay, so
the final
the top two, and we'll go with number one because obviously it'll give it away. It's either Calgary or Toronto. The number one defense in the North Division belongs to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now,
I'm sorry, which podcast is this? I mean, it kind of doesn't surprise me. That defense, like, they made some additions that have finally taken a step forward.
Right. So I'll talk about Calgary first, though. Mark Giordano, still good, above average. He's fallen off a little bit. Rasmus Andersson is someone where you look at his numbers and you're like, huh? Because he has that reputation of like, oh yeah, Rasmus Andersson's great, but he's a below average defender right now. He's had a pretty big decline this year. Noah Hannafin, though, is still great. Like, the offense is falling back a little bit, but he's had big defensive improvements this year. Chris Tanev, very good pickup for them. He's had a big bounce back. He stayed healthy. He's been pretty good defensively. He's an above average to good addition for that blue line. And then what helps out Calgary is that they don't have an abysmal defender or two. You know, if you look back at Edmonton, like I said, the numbers for like Chris Russell and Darnell Nurse drag that rating down. For Vancouver, Myers, Ben, and Hamonic. For Winnipeg, Morrissey and Pullman. For Montreal, Edmondson, Sherratt. You get the point. Calgary, I mean, their two worst defensemen this season have been Nikita Nesterov and Juuso Valimaki, who are both in between below average and bad to meh. Like, they're not atrocious. So from an overall standpoint, Calgary is pretty solid, even though they only have one defenseman who I'd qualify as good to great in Noah Hannafin. But then you get to Toronto. And again, it's the well-rounded approach.
So, yeah, I was going to say, so it is the well-rounded approach, right? Like, it's not like Toronto has the best defenseman in the North Division, right?
Well, I mean, looking at the numbers, I honestly think they do for this season. And any guess who the best defenseman in the North Division is right now?
So, I mean, obviously, if you would want to say Morgan Rielly here, but I think it might go a little deeper than that. I would be absolutely fascinated if it was TJ Brodie.
You nailed it.
Is it TJ Brodie?
You nailed it.
So Calgary, all they had to do was re-sign him, and they could have had the title.
Yeah. No, yeah. If they still had TJ Brodie over the likes of Nikita Nesterov, they would have the best defense. And the funny thing is, like, and again, I'm not saying this is the best way to look at it. To look at 6 individuals, come up with a number next to them, and average it out. I'm not saying that's the best way to say who has the best defense, but in terms of the 6 individuals and their performance so far, it's not even close. Like, the Leafs blow everybody out of the water. And it's because Morgan Rielly is still fantastic offensively. There's been a lot of talks about his defense being garbage this year, and it's always kind of been garbage. But Morgan Rielly is a fantastic offensive defenseman. But then you get the TJ Brodie, and his offense is still good. It's actually dropped off a little bit, which isn't surprising. It's not his role on that top pair to play offense. It's his role to shut things down defensively, and he's absolutely tremendous. So any hype you've had, you may have heard from Leafs fans saying, "Oh my God, TJ Brodie's this defensive revelation." Yeah, no, he's absolutely deserving of that hype. Jake Muzzin as well is still great. Offensively, he was a bit underrated in the past. The offense has dropped off a bit, but like defensively, he's getting better, which is scary. And then, as Leafs fans can tell you, the emergence of Justin Hall, a solid defender, good PK numbers too. Like, Justin Hall's emergence has helped out this defense a lot. Travis Dermott too, above average. I mean, he's dropped off a bit on both sides, but he is still really good defensively. The one bad note on this defense right now, in terms of, again, the 6 defensemen who have played the most games, is Zack Bogosian, who, from an analytical standpoint, is that going to show up to what Zack Bogosian provides in terms of leadership, the physical game? No. From an analytical standpoint, obviously, I don't think anyone's going to be surprised to hear that Zack Bogosian is a big yikes on that blue line, which is why you always see articles from people who are in the analytics community saying, yeah, Leafs fans want Taylor Hall, Philip Forsberg, but they need a defenseman. They need an Ekholm. And I think say what you want about the Leafs goaltending situation, but man, if the Leafs get a defenseman to replace Zack Bogosian, I mean, it was already tough to say they weren't going to come out of the North Division, but they literally have one weak link on that defense.
Yeah, that, and then just a fun fact about Zack Bogosian. If you bring up his official NHL page, his headshot, he looks exactly like homeless Austin Matthews. It's great. Like, it's uncanny. So that's crazy. So the Leafs actually figured out how to play defense.
Yeah.
While paying 50% of your salary cap to 3 guys.
Yeah. I mean, when you put it that way, but
go figure.
It's fair play to Kyle Dubas, man. The moves that he's made to trade for Jake Muzzin and sign TJ Brodie, they have really, really paid off. And I mean, obviously people want us to talk about the Leafs. Like, I'll skip ahead to one of the other questions. We got it from a couple of people. This one was from Brawley_Ben on Twitter, basically saying Leafs contenders or pretenders. And I mean, yeah, no, the Leafs are legit. Like, if Alex Galchenyuk I'll just finish this point. If Alex Galchenyuk can keep doing what he's done and look as good as he's looked, cool. Their biggest issue is the goaltending. I mean, yeah, they have some issues in terms.
Oh, yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, like, they have some issues coming up in terms of like expiring contracts. Zach Hyman's up at the end of the year. Wayne Simmons, who would probably take a pay cut to stay. Who knows what will happen with Chucky, Spezza, Joe. But then, like, defensively, like, okay, Bogosian's up. That's not a big loss. They have to re-sign Dermott. And then the goaltending, obviously, Freddie Anderson's up. So they're actually still in a very good spot.
Yeah, you don't re-sign him.
They're in a very, right? They're in a very good spot for the next season or two, I would say. Like, the Leafs are absolutely, it's crazy to say. I know. The Leafs are in a cup window. So, yeah, Leafs, contender or pretender. The Leafs are contenders. Like I said, you get that one piece on defense. and figure out if Jack Campbell's your guy, and if you're done with Freddie Anderson before his contract's up at the end of the year. I believe in the Leafs, at least their ability to win. We'll see if they do it. It's obviously very different to have a contending team on paper and have it turn out the way you want it to on the ice. But no, the Leafs hype is legit. I know they haven't had the best run of form lately, but no, they are deserving of that hype for sure.
Yeah, I think that team, I think next year you're going to see a goalie tandem of Jack Campbell and then somebody along the lines of like Chris Drieger, like a borderline starter that just can't handle the workload that they can just use to supplement in case Campbell goes down. Even, and dare I say this, I know Toronto Maple Leafs fans are gonna like, I don't know what you're holding while you listen to this podcast, but you're gonna crush or break it. But you could even bring back James Reimer.
So that's been talked about a lot. Like James Reimer's name was thrown around in conversation with like Colorado apparently kicking tires.
Yeah.
Which I'm sorry, James Reimer
weird.
behind that defense. Holy hell.
Yeah. Holy cow. Yeah, it's also weird to think of Carolina as like, well, I guess, yeah, they do have too many goalies.
Yeah, if Mrazek comes back and
before we move on,
plays as hot as he did, and then you have Nedeljkovic, who looks like he's the real deal finally. Yeah, I mean, Carolina's in a very good spot.
I mean, Nedeljkovic looks like the best goalie they've had since, wow, I don't even remember his name. I feel like the worst pseudo Carolina fan ever. Cam
Ward.
Yeah, Cam Ward.
For one season in 2006.
I'm sorry,
Cam Ward was great. You know, the funny thing is, I do want to point it out, though, for you talked about like Chris Drieger. In terms of like upcoming free agent goalies, Chris Drieger would be a pretty good shout. You know, along the lines of like, I think.
Yeah, we can't afford him.
I mean, possible pickups. Like I'm looking at the list of upcoming free agent goaltenders. It's funny, Mrazek and Nedeljkovic in Carolina, both their deals are up. But yeah, like in terms of guys that you could expect to hit the market, Chris Drieger, maybe Aiden Hill. I think Arizona would hold on to him. But like Drieger, Mike Smith, Yaroslav Halak, Jonathan Bernier, Linus Hallmark, if he's not an RFA, to get the hell away from Buffalo, Laurent Brossois. Like there are plenty of goalies that the Leafs could go out and get to run a tandem with Jack Campbell, where you don't have to spend $5-6+ million on someone like Freddie Anderson. And let's be honest, Freddie Anderson's absolutely played his way out of a massive contract. It's been a rough season for him.
Yeah. So before we move on to the next question, quick update on the Sean William Scott Trophy, just because it bears mentioning. Eric Goodbranson's actually in fourth at 47 minutes. At third, we've got Frederick from the Bruins at 53 minutes. First is Brendan Lemieux, the recently traded Brendan Lemieux at 59 minutes and 31 games played. However, second is Curtis Gabriel of the San Jose Sharks. He has 55 penalty minutes in 11 games played.
So for the record, yeah, no, I'll edit that in. I'll edit that in later. While you're reading that, I had reacted to the Zack Bogosian picture that you sent me on Twitter, which is something else.
Oh gosh, yeah, he does. It's uncanny.
Yeah. Shout out to Curtis Gabriel though. Shout out to Curtis Gabriel for, again, according to Sharks fans, being the only guy to actively try to give a damn about the season. Although. Yeah, you know what? We won't talk about the Sharks that much later on, but congrats to Erik Karlsson for showing up for once. That was a very impressive performance last night. So yeah, if a Shark shows up against Minnesota, does it make an impact on this podcast? The answer is apparently yes.
All right. So while we're talking about goalies, we got another Twitter question here from Cody DHF3.
Mm-hmm.
Who's next in line in goal as the Ducks starter if Gibson goes to a new team?
So it's funny. I added this one just because it was one of the easier ones to answer. And Anaheim is fortunately one of those teams that kind of has the successor in their system already. You know, we talked about Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen for the Sabres, with Architect last week. Because who doesn't love Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen? But for the Ducks, they have their guy, and he goes by the name of Lukas Dostal, who I think every Ducks fan has been hyped about for a few years. I mean, he was drafted in 2018. He turns 21 this year. And just a stat line. Last season in the Finnish Liga, he had a .928 save percentage in 43 games, a 27-8-6 record, which is, absolutely ridiculous is the best way to put it. And God, Elite Prospects isn't cooperating with me. That's okay. And this year, he split time between Liga again and the AHL. And in Liga, with the Ilves once more, he played 11 games, has a .941 save percentage with a 10-1-0 record. As much as you can hype up Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, Lukas Dostal looks legit for the Ducks. And in the AHL, he has a .913 in 12 games as a 20-year-old. So they are set. And as much as I kind of disagree with the idea of trading, John Gibson at his lowest value, because that's where he's at right now. If the right offer comes along for John Gibson, I think they could legitimately consider it. They have some other goalies in the system as well that aren't as highly touted, where their development's a bit more up and down. They recently drafted Olli Eriksson-Ek within the past couple of years as well. He's a year older, and he hasn't been that bad in the AHL either. So, talk about those teams. Like we talked about the Bruins in terms of having the likes of Dan Vladar and Jeremy Swayman in the system. The Ducks could look to very well move on from Gibson. So I don't think they have to look at a trade or like, oh, who's in the draft? They're pretty much set already.
All right. So we got another question here from Jarek Moore on Twitter. Who's the best YouTuber and why is it Tougie24?
So the only reason why I added this is because I want to know what Deej's subscriptions on YouTube look like. I want to know who Deej watches on YouTube and who you consider a top tier YouTuber.
Oh, okay. So I'll just shout out some channels I like to watch. So one of them you actually sent me, and I was unaware of this YouTuber until you told me about him, but that would be Finn McKenty, aka the Punk Rock MBA.
100%.
If you like 90s, early 2000s music, even late 2000s to a degree, it's like he puts together a really good show and he uploads a lot. He does a really good job of making stuff that shouldn't be interesting very interesting.
It's true.
I'm a big fan of Jeff Cavalier, who his YouTube tag is AthleanX. He's a personal trainer for a lot of WWE superstars, and he's a former physical therapist for the New York Mets that worked with pitchers, and he's just like it's the best exercise channel on YouTube. Like the guy knows what he's talking about. And then the other two shout outs I'll give is to Game Ranks, which is my favorite clickbait video game news channel.
100%.
Jake Baldino, he does an incredible job with that channel. And then also big fan of, if you were a fan of like cracked.com back in the day when it like ruled the internet and was super funny, there is a channel called Weird History that is very similar to that, where every few days they'll just put up a weird video where it's like, how did people in the Victorian era spend their time? Or like currently they're doing a flashback series where they're going through every year of the 90s 1 week at a time. So I don't know. Yeah, those are my YouTube recommendations.
Fair. I will also look to shout out a couple. A music related channel. He has been around for years and years and years, but a shout out to Todd in the Shadows, one of my personal favorites as a music reviewer. I've mentioned him a lot in the past. Shout out to the Happy Console Gamer, one of my favorite gaming related channels that happen to be out there. There's a YouTuber who has about 17,000 different channels that are all kind of history related, but a man by the name of Simon Whistler, who is known for like biographics and channels like that. So as a history nerd, I'm a big fan of that. And I want to shout out my buddy Kofi from Secret Base, fellow streamer as well, formerly, of course, SB Nation there as well. So, I'm subscribed to so many different YouTube channels. Like, there's so many damn good channels out there. But yeah, there's a couple, and I am definitely not amongst the best of the best. Jesus.
Excellent. All right, so next we got Diet Cocoa, and I think this is our last question. Yeah. Cocoa always coming in hot. See, a thought months ago was that the Caps might make a move at the deadline for a veteran goalie after the Lundqvist injury. Samsonov and Vanacek have been a great tandem, parentheses, better than expected, close parentheses. But young and no playoff experience, do you think a trade is needed?
I mean, the Caps are, at the time of recording here, the top team in the East. It's tough to say for sure, though, right? Because the thought of unexperienced goaltending, how much does that really mean when we've seen Jordan Binnington and Matt Murray lead their teams to cups? So I think, I mean, sure, if you can get the right guy, go out and shore up the goaltending position. I mean, last I knew, there was talk that Lundqvist might not even be done for the entire year, or that at least he could be back next year. But I mean, it's a 9-10 for Vanacek and a 9.08 for Samsonov at this stage. Could you get better goaltending? Sure. I mean, without looking, further in depth at the Caps, no pun intended, cap situation, the assets that they would have to go out and get people. Their projected cap space and current cap space on Cap Friendly is listed at $0. They would have to do some maneuvering, and I don't see any expiring deals that are up that would allow them to make those deals. So they'd have to move, someone that has at least a year's worth of term, which means you'd be looking probably at like Justin Schultz, which I don't know Justin Schultz stats on the season. I'm going to take a quick look, but I still see, $4 million for Justin Schultz. And yep, judging by the stats, hey, that was a mistake, like we all knew it would be. So I don't know. I mean, I think, the Caps are definitely in that spot, though, right? Where they're still a great team. Ovi's 35 on an expiring deal. I'm sure he'll be back. But they have a team that could absolutely win the Stanley Cup this year. If it would make Caps fans feel better, I'll take their word for it that they should go out and get somebody. But obviously the goalie market right now is a very strange beast on its own, just because it's been such a weird season for so many people, and for so many teams with the, COVID restrictions and everything. I don't know who you would go out and get that's on that expiring deal, unless you are looking at, I mean, obviously Edmonton's not going to part with Mike Smith, but like your best options right now, Jonathan Bernier, Linus Ullmark, maybe Ranta, if the Coyotes are willing to part with them, James Reimer. Do you feel that much more secure with players of that caliber than you do with the two younger guys that you have now? It's a tough call. And then what happens with one of those guys? He goes to the taxi squad, doesn't play regularly. Is that going to stunt some kind of development if you can't send him down? So as we talk through this, I'd stay with who they have.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's working. I don't think you necessarily need a veteran goalie in the playoffs anymore. And in the rare case that does become an issue, Craig Anderson is still stealthily on this roster. So let's move into some general hockey talk.
It's what we do.
First and foremost, in Blues news, Bob Plager passes away. I know you mentioned this in the show notes, and I think this is an important takeaway, but I mean, obviously a huge loss for Blues fans, but he got to be there for the Cup win.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of one of the things that I had seen in the aftermath of hearing of his passing, which again, for a recently turned 78-year-old man. It's one of those things where you hear like, oh, okay, there's 78, but then you hear car accident, and it's just heartbreaking. But then, yeah, in the aftermath of that, especially on Twitter, a lot of what you would see was definitely, the aftermath of the 2019 Cup win, the pictures, and just the happiness on that man's face. So, yeah, it sucks. My heart goes out to Blues fans because that's someone who meant a lot to that organization. And it's just really shitty news in the past week. And it's, it's not the easiest thing to bring up to just kind of, look past it. But I mean, that man had connection to the Blues for, almost for as long as they were an organization, right? So, I mean, you think about just the importance of what he had with that organization. Again, I mean, first played for the Blues in 67, 68. So, I mean, he was tied to that organization for longer than basically anybody listening to this podcast was alive. It's absolutely crazy. So, a life well lived, and no easy way to segment out of that. But I felt like, it's one of those things where, tough subject, but you don't necessarily want to avoid it, or at least I don't on this show. So I wanted to bring that up. But getting into some of the other topics that we had here.
Yeah, he's an important member of the hockey community.
Yeah. I mean, that's really the best way to put it, I would say. Speaking of the hockey community, I guess, because there's no perfect segue to the next topic, wanted to shout out as well the Boston Pride 2021 Isabelle Cup winners, the only two-time champs in league history. Again, I cannot wait. I finally pulled the trigger there, Deej, and ordered myself a Pride jersey. Got the captain, Jillian Dempsey.
A jersey.
And ordered their championship shirt as well. So I am pumped for those to get here. I wish they were here for this occasion. And the NWHL, too, expanding into Montreal, which was a bit of a contentious issue because of the other league, the CWHL's history in that city. But, of course, that league is now defunct, and that's obviously where you have players like the Hillary Knights of the world, the Marie-Philippe Plans, who were in that league and are holding out now to try and secure a better future for women's hockey, which, I mean, that's still an evolving situation. But yeah, so shout out to the NWHL for somehow, some way getting back and pulling off an end of the season, and with no better end result than the Boston Pride winning the Isabelle Cup.
Indeed. I'm glad that they were able to, after suspending operations, they were able to put it together and award an Isabelle Cup. And then now it looks like the NWHL is actually expanding. So it's crazy how within, a month and a half now, how much the league has turned around.
Yeah, I mean, dude, it went from, oh my God, Lake Placid to, oh my God, it collapsed. There was no bubble, and this is a horrible look for the league. And like you said, now within a month span, it's, hey, they made it work and they're expanding. So it's wild to follow professional women's hockey and just the constantly evolving landscape.
Yeah. So let's get to the meat and potatoes of this week, the Tim Peel controversy.
Take it away.
So Tim Peel, he wanted to give a penalty to Nashville, so he did. The guy had a dream and he made it come true. He was going to retire at the end of this year. Mm-hmm. And when they were like, he's done officiating games, is like, congratulations, we're going to pay you for 3 weeks or 4 weeks or however is long left in this season. And then and then he retires. There was no real punishment here.
Yeah. So this was from Bob Mackenzie, who said this on NBCSN. Quote, it's my understanding if you read the release, Tim Peel's not being fired. He'll continue to be paid. His pension is still intact. I don't get the sense there's any significant appetite on the NHL's part to change policy on how games are officiated. So like you mentioned, and obviously at this stage, this is one of the reasons why we're like, man, we should move to 2 a week. Number one was to try and keep episode times down. We'll see about that. But also, this happened a week ago. So
turn into the Lord of the
Rings. So you've heard all of the takes on Tim Peel at this stage. But there was no punishment for him. It's go sit at home. You were going to sit at home anyway. Yeah. And God, continue on, Deej, continue on.
Well, okay, so then you get to I believe it was Wayne Simmons asking about a penalty, at which point the ref covered up his body cam microphone and explained what happened. Like, I mean, okay, so let me go to like the crux of an argument, right? Mm-hmm. So like there's been all of these things this week where there have been penalties. Like there was the Leafs Oilers game last night with Larson. Right after we finished the podcast last night, there was Hornquist getting like horse collared in overtime, right in front of a referee. Like there's at least 10 examples from this last week alone of like things happening right in front of referees and no penalties. So let me rewind to January of this year. There was a Reddit post that analyzed penalties over time to look at teams to see, hey, this team gets a lot of power plays and they never get called for penalties. And what they found out is that doesn't exist. And what does exist is makeup calls are incredibly prevalent across the league. And so this is clearly like instead of using penalties to actually punish people for committing penalties, it seems like refs are doing it to keep the game even.
Game management is a phrase that I have not heard this much in my life. And it's just, God, it's so frustrating. I mean, again, it's been talked about to death. It sucks that we're late to the topic, but yeah, with Tim Peel in particular, again, it's not a matter of he's the only issue, right? We all know this. I mean, this is a guy who has over 1,300 regular season games called. He's called 90 playoff games. His first game officiated in the NHL was on October 1st, 1999. Like, this is not some new guy. He officiated in Sochi at the Olympics in 2014. Like, obviously, it's like he's just one aspect of the part of the greater problem. And like you mentioned too, the official later on in the week covering up a microphone in the aftermath of that, because again, Tim Peel getting caught on the microphone was a production issue. Pure fluke that we even heard this. And then all you have is the talk of game management in the past week. And then when the Bruins play the Devils, the Bruins are already on the power play. And there is the most obvious trip in the world from Pavel Zacha. And of course the refs don't call it because it's game management. It would be unfair to New Jersey for them to go down 5-on-3 when there's already a penalty. I mean, we have talked about this on this show, Deej. There's a reason why I don't often, whether it be here or on YouTube, I don't like to talk about officiating in certain calls or lack thereof, because what the hell is there to say? We all know it's broken. And within a week or so of a day, I think I said that on last week's show. And then that night, you have Tim Peel getting caught like this. We all know like this was the truth about it. And people have asked me like, oh man, you don't bet on hockey? And I'm like, why the hell would I bet on hockey? It's random enough as it is. And then you get into the butterfly effect of the officiating being handled this way. Yeah, no, I will keep my money. Thank you very much. I mean, it's just, it's the least surprising thing. I think you could have, shown a light towards. It's incredibly unsurprising.
Yeah, and I think very unfortunately we're going to have to wait till the GM's meeting this offseason for anything to get done here.
I mean, that's if you have faith and confidence that they're going to do anything about it, because I mean, this is just how the officiating's gone. And, I mention them every week, but whatever, listening to the Steve Dangle podcast, and they talked about the Jack Edwards thing and joked about, now Bruins fans know what it's like. Like, look, I know as a Bruins fan, my team greatly benefited from this officiating style in 2011. There's no doubt about it. It doesn't make the cup illegitimate because this is how the officiating goes. But at the end of the day, like, yeah, this is how the league has essentially instructed their officials to call the games. It just is. And it's a problem with the league in general. That's the only way to phrase it. So it's brutal. You just call it what it is. There's not too much to say. I don't think we can drag it out into a 40-minute conversation where it's an incredibly screwed up situation that everyone has known has been screwed up for a long time, and that nobody has any faith in it actually changing. Because why would it?
Yeah. So it sucks, and I'm sure it's gonna every night top post Reddit rest of the season is gonna be a missed call.
Yeah, I mean, as if it wasn't. I mean, that's the problem. Like, this whole incident just added, fuel to the fire. Where, as it is, a big talking point this season was the inconsistency with officiating and penalty calls. We talked last week, again, the day of this incident, about the about the Brandon Tanev. I was going to say the Brendan Lemieux, but about the Brandon Tanev penalty where he hit Jared Tenorti, and the controversy over Penguins fans being like, how is this a major? There's an argument it shouldn't even be a 2, which I thought it was a penalty. Say what you want about it being a major. Again, every day, every other day, there was, oh my God, look at this no call. Look at this penalty. How is this being this way? And then this incident happens. It's just absolutely brutal. Like, all around. That is the only way to phrase it at this stage. It's a bad situation that was made worse. It's like an episode of Kitchen Nightmares. Gordon Ramsay starts doing, the old finger across the stove, and he's like, oh, that's disgusting. And then he starts checking in cabinets, and then he goes into the freezer, and it's like, how can this get worse? It just keeps getting worse the more you actually look at it. But we knew all along there was mold in the freezer. It's Kitchen Nightmares. No one's surprised. It's the NHL. We knew all along the officiating and the standards of this league were incredibly off base. Nobody's surprised. Did you like my analogy?
I did enjoy the Gordon Ramsay analogy, and I was just like, the second you mentioned the freezer, I was like, shit, I need to clean my freezer out.
Oh man.
Yeah, they got to do something about it. Like, they're just going to continually get public backlash. And luckily, of all the major leagues, the NHL seems to be the most on the ball and in touch with the fans. I mean, which is not saying a lot, but they are,
Yeah. I mean, it's tough to, I don't know. I suppose there's arguments in certain ways. I mean, certainly, like, if you compare it to like the NFL is probably the top of baseball too. Baseball probably is the top of the list for, like, this commissioner gives not a single darn over your concerns, as you will continue to watch the best baseball players in the world play for that hunk of metal and having their staff bang on a trash can. I don't know. Shout out to Houston. Don't worry. We haven't forgotten.
Yeah. We have not.
Friggin' Houston.
Yeah. Okay. Well, all that said, let's get into the Eric Stahl trade and some other guys who moved around in a segment that we can only call "Looks like LA's done" for the trade deadline.
I was going to call it "Moving Dudes," but
moving dudes, the higher moving dudes. So this first trade's interesting to me, with Alex Volkov going to Anaheim for Antoine Morin. Alex Volkov's good. I feel like Tampa lost that trade, and I've got no idea what's going on there.
Yeah, I was surprised to see that move too. Maybe it's just a deal where they're like, look, this guy's just not going to be able to crack our lineup, and we're going to do him a favor. And with Antoine Morin, or whatever the proper pronunciation may be, I just think it was an instance where Anaheim's like, yeah, this just isn't going to happen, is it? So I don't know. It's an interesting one for sure. Definitely not one of the bigger deals of the week, but it was one that kind of caught my attention at the start. And then, as you mentioned, we had the Eric Stahl trade as well, which was Eric Stahl with 50% retained going to Montreal for a third and a fifth, which, again, not too much to talk about with it. Eric Stahl, very down year in Buffalo, because who isn't having a down year, but still a useful player for the Habs. They got him on a very cheap option as well, so it's a good pickup for them, no doubt. I mean, would I have fixed some things with my defense? You know, maybe not had to rely on Edmondson or Sherratt. Sure, but hey, what do I know? I don't have biceps the size of the Acropolis.
Indeed.
Hey.
Herculean, if you will.
Caught you off guard with the Acropolis name drop, didn't I?
I did. You did.
Oh God.
The ancient. I woke up this morning and I was like, you know what I'm gonna fix up today is some ancient Greece puns. Like, it's good ancient Greece Tuesday. I thought the only ancient Greece we were gonna find was in the kitchen. That was being investigated.
So Brendan Lemieux,
it's all falling apart. So,
unless you have thoughts on Eric Stahl and just what he could mean for Montreal,
it's good for Eric Stahl.
Yeah.
I think Eric Stahl is the real winner of this trade.
He absolutely is. When it comes to other winners of trades, LA acquires Brendan Lemieux for the New York Rangers for a fourth rounder. For the Rangers, you get the option of making room for Vitaly Kravtsov, which looks great. For the Kings, you get Brendan Lemieux. Like, from an analytical standpoint, he's not going to be an incredible force on the score sheet, but if you want a guy who's a real dick to play against and will play the physical game and make it more difficult for the other team, which of course is absolutely a factor when judging players, then yeah, Brendan Lemieux is effective in that way. So why not? I mean, I don't know where they're going to have him slotted in the lineup, but when the trade happened, I looked at the likes of someone like Trevor Moore or Austin Wagner, and I'm like, yeah, he's an improvement on them. So why not? Essentially, why not give it a shot? Although watch as he'll end up put him on the top line with Anze Kopitar. Protect our beautiful Slovenian boy.
Yeah, I don't know. I think he's going to play 2 minutes and then go to the penalty box based on what we learned earlier about the Sean William Scott Trophy and how he's in the lead for it.
And the last trade here, again, we just want to touch up on these. They're not the biggest deal in the world, but when there's enough trades, you got to talk about it. Ottawa acquired Mike Amadio from LA for Christian Wolanin. So essentially, it was Mike Amadio and a fourth for Brendan Lemieux and Christian Wolanin, which, yeah, good on LA. Why not? And in terms of signings as well, because there were a couple, the most notable being Cole Caufield to Montreal. He is going to report to Laval first, which is probably a good move. But we talked about the Leafs earlier and that deserved level of hype. Yeah, people should be excited. People should be very excited about Cole Caufield. Obviously, a bit disappointing for him that he would sign up this early on. But the NCAA tournament's been rather unpredictable. We actually didn't touch up on that, but the Frozen Four on April 8th kicking off. You have Minnesota State and St. Cloud State, as well as Massachusetts, UMass against Minnesota Duluth, which it's been interesting because the stat I saw, you have 3 2 seeds, Mass, Minnesota, and St. Cloud, and a 3 seed, Minnesota Duluth. So it's just the second time that the 16-team version of the tournament has not had a number 1 seed make the Final Four. It's the first time since 2007. That said, Minnesota Duluth is looking to win 3 in a row, which hasn't been done since the early 50s by the University of Michigan. or you'll have a first-time champion. So go Minnesota Duluth or UMass. Whoever wins that matchup, I'm rooting for them. Duluth for the history or UMass for obvious reasons.
Yeah, I watched a little bit of the Boston College St. Cloud game for Spencer Knight, and my God, did that team not help out Spencer Knight?
Yeah, I didn't expect them to be that bad. I was expecting a little bit better.
There was like one segment where Spencer Knight made 6 saves in like under 5 seconds before they finally jammed one in on him. Just nobody could touch the puck except for Spencer Knight and St. Cloud. It wasn't good.
Yeah. Thoughts on Cole Caufield, though, if you have any? I mean, again, 52 points in 31 games this season for Wisconsin. Obviously, a stud at the World Juniors. He led the NCAA in scoring. I mean, obviously, I'll take as many shots at the Habs as I can. And as much as I'd love to say that Cole Caufield was outscored by the man who finished in second, who has my favorite name in the world, that being Odin Tufto for Quinnipiac University. Odin Tufto. Undrafted free agent, 24 years old. Somebody go after the captain of Quinnipiac. Get Mr. Odin Tufto. But yeah, as much as I'd love to be able to take a shot at Montreal, like Cole Caufield's sick. We all know this.
Yeah, I mean, Cole Caufield, I think he immediately has the best shot on the team of everybody in Montreal. Like, I mean, he's a goal scorer. Because like when you think about Montreal, they don't really have a sniper. I mean, obviously with Caufield, you get the DeBrincat comparisons just because of his size.
Yeah, 5'7". So
I don't know. Yeah, he's got an elite shot, and he immediately is joining a team that needs somebody with an elite shot. I mean, obviously not immediately. He's starting with Laval, but I don't know. This is a good thing for the Canadiens.
I mean, underrated as well. If you look at Montreal's cap friendly, they have a very interesting offseason coming up. Tatar, UFA. Philip Deneau, UFA, and not had a great season. Armia, UFA, now Eric Stahl, and Corey Perry. They do have Lehkonen and Kotkaniemi as RFAs, but it's a very, very interesting situation there for the Habs.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, we'll see. I think, which is weird because finally they play well, and then next year we're going to see a very different looking forward core. So hopefully they'll find some consistency.
All right. So that aside, before we move on to the next topic, then really quickly, college free agents, we just kind of mentioned a few, or at least one with an amazing name. When it comes to undrafted free agents, it's that time of year where guys start signing and people start getting a bit overhyped. And for the most part, if you're going to ask us, hey, what's your opinion on this guy? I have no take. Alex Steeves is a name that Leafs Nation has been like, oh my God, is this guy going to be great? Maybe, but it's pretty unlikely. Drafted NCAA players have a tough enough shot outside of what feels like the third round or later. But undrafted guys, tell me for Toronto, how great has Joe Duszak been, or however you say his name? He's the defenseman who tore up the NCAA, hasn't cracked the Leafs. What about Max Verano for the Sens, who's not even on the Sens anymore? Mike Vecchione for the Flyers. Spencer Fu. I rest my case. Like, let's not, when it comes to undrafted free agents, set that hype level too high. For the Leafs playoff chances, set them high. For Cole Caufield, set them high. For undrafted free agent out of the NCAA, they have a massive uphill battle, and it's just how it works. And even some guys who were drafted, like I said, they have a really tough time making it. So just wanted to bring that up as well. And two, should have brought it up when we talked about the NCAA. Shout out to that Minnesota Duluth, North Dakota 5 overtime game, the longest game in NCAA tournament history, men's or women's. So yeah, the NCAA tournament on the men's side, I can't even say on the women's side, but just in general, the NCAA tournament doing quite well. Deej, do you want to hit the happier note that we have, or the down note we have 2 notes to hit before we move on to our end of show division breakdown. What are you thinking?
We'll hit the happier note first.
All right. So another big talking point, obviously, over the last couple of weeks has been trade deadline. And I mean, I've been quoted in saying that I think the deadline's going to be atrocious. Absolutely atrocious. But there is the update that the Canadian government has approved a new 7-day quarantine with extra testing for NHL players traded from American teams to Canadian teams before the deadline. So maybe there's a little bit more hope. I know at the very least, I'll probably be live streaming on deadline day. We might do a live version of the podcast that day on the fly in general, but I can't get my hopes up. I just can't. How many times do we go into the deadline? Like one of the famous moments for me on Twitch, it was either deadline day or free agency. I think it was deadline day. And it's like, oh my God, it's going to be amazing. And the highlight of that stream was I was watching a Canadian feed and saw a commercial for a lovely establishment called East Side Mario's, which is a Canadian restaurant chain that is basically their version of Olive Garden. And number one, I can't wait to go to it to try the home loaf, because when you're a restaurant, you can't call it garlic bread. It's the home loaf. Not to mention, of course, DeJ, as noted on its Wikipedia page, it is best recognized by its original logo featuring the Statue of Liberty holding a large tomato in place of a torch, as well as the jingle containing the phrase, "Hey, Buddha boom, Buddha bing." So when East Side Mario's was the highlight of a deadline stream, I can never have my hopes up again, but I am still determined to get to an East Side Mario's sometime soon.
Yeah, luckily you're close.
Coming soon to a St. John East Side Mario's near you. Maybe I'll go to Fredericton. I think the girlfriend has a friend who's actually moving to Fredericton. So East Side Mario's, once that border's open.
It's the easternmost East Side Mario's.
We're coming.
Oh, fantastic.
Oh, God.
And then so then we'll get to the news, which is the Seattle Thunderbirds incident where I guess they had 2 players. They called the team's lone black player a racial slur, waved a banana in front of him. And then apparently this has been going on for some time. How fucking stupid are those kids? Like, what did they think would happen? I don't know. Obviously they're 17 and 18, which, like, now that I'm older in my 30s, like, you're like a fucking child, but still, Jesus Christ. Like, how did you, like, at what point were you in planning that or putting that together? Like, because obviously you had a prop, like, fucking, like, there was some thought put into this. You know what I mean? It wasn't even like a heat of the moment thing. They're fucking idiots, and and now they're not on the team anymore.
Yeah, so obviously, like, the T-Birds didn't release the names. It's very easy to find out who the 3 were that were involved. I don't think it's fair to the person on the end of this racial abuse to have his name out there and tied to this. It's not fair to him to be known as that black kid that was racially abused. So I give them credit for not directly putting his name out there, and of course not directly putting the name out there for the other 2. Again, it's easy enough to find. It's not that hard to see who was on the team a week ago and who isn't there now. It's incredibly disheartening. I mean, we all know that this stuff still goes on, so it's obviously nice to see the Thunderbirds take that stance and to take action, and you can argue that it's the bare minimum that they should have done. I agree, but let's be honest, in hockey, sometimes the bare minimum isn't met. So I view this as progress. And, being 17 and 18 years old, it's not, of course, to say that anybody here is making any excuses for them whatsoever. And again, this is what happens when you actually face the consequences of your actions. I mean, I don't think there's going to be any sympathy whatsoever for them from anybody whose opinion that you should value. So good to the Seattle Thunderbirds, but I think we would have been remiss if, again, we didn't bring this up to at least put a spotlight on the situation, in that if you are a younger individual in these set of circumstances like this, if you see shit like this, because we all know that, I mean, it's everywhere. It's obviously not just a hockey issue, but it's not as if it's just, oh, those stories of hazing in junior, oh, those are from years ago, what happened with Akeem Alou. And like, no, this stuff still happens. And ultimately, you know, it's one of those things where you want to be on the right side of history on this. It's very clear what the right thing is to do. And, you know, it really does speak to the, I am going to use the word bravery of the person being abused here, because if it was happening before, you know, I can't speak to what it's like in that scenario. All I can speak to is two guys like Akeem Alou who have shared their story, where it's not the easiest thing in the world to say something and to bring what is viewed by some as unnecessary drama to the team, even though defining that situation as drama is absurd. So we'll wrap that up and move on. But again, felt it necessary to bring that up as well, where, yeah, don't, if you're on that side of thinking, this isn't as big of a problem as it used to be, it's still going on. And again, if you are in that situation, it doesn't matter if you're 17 years old or 37 and you see this shit going on, you know, the term that you'll always see used, whether or not it's by someone speaking up like a Matt Dumba or a PK Subban, it's a matter of being an ally, right? It's a matter of, if you see this shit going on, be a big enough person, man or woman, to speak up and hopefully, slowly but surely, make a difference on this subject. DH, that said, our division breakdown here. 4 divisions. We're not going to break down every team anymore. We're going to leave it to just the teams that are interesting, because as it turns out, we're getting to that part of the season where there are far too many teams that simply there's nothing interesting about them at that stage of the past week. I'll leave it up to you. What division are we hitting first?
Well, we'll just start with the Central Division, right?
Rant away, buddy. Rant away.
Just because, well, obviously Florida has had some injury struggles this last week. Barkov went down in warmups before a game. Then Hornquist went down the very next game. And then, of course, the highlight of all this is Ekblad is out. He's fractured his left leg. He's going to be out for 12 weeks, which, if you look at your calendar, will be perfect because he can rejoin the team for the Stanley Cup Finals. So obviously this leads to another question with rentals coming up. How do you replace Ekblad? And the answer to this is that you don't. One, because you can't replace a guy like Ekblad. And secondly, the answer is you don't replace Ekblad in this case, because the Florida Panthers' top defensive pairing has 2 right-handed shots, and Ekblad's defensive partner is one Mackenzie Weegar. So what you do, and according to, I know you've seen this, according to advanced metrics, the best defenseman on the team is Mackenzie Weegar. And so what you do is you replace Mackenzie Weegar on that top line. And I mean, there's obviously some places. I think Rob Ushi asked this question. Yeah, how do you replace him? You need a left-handed shot, basically, to add. Florida is extremely deep with right-handed shots. It's nuts. You know, you got Weegar, you've got Gudis, Nutivara, Anton Strawman, Noah Juleson. We're fine on right-handed shots. However, when you get to left-handed shots, you've got Yandel, Connaughton, and Gustav Forsling. So obviously a guy like Ekholm would have been nice, but Nashville's making a run. We'll talk about that in a second. You know who I think this team needs and it's really going to depend on the asking price. I think Vince Dunn would be a fantastic addition.
I keep hearing that he's maybe on the market and maybe not. I don't know what's going on with Vince Dunn at the moment. I don't know. I don't know how to view it. I will say, just looking here, like TSN had a trade bait list from March 24th, and I don't see Vince Dunn anywhere in the top 25. So again, whether or not he's available or not, I don't know. But like you said, it's a rough spot to be in right now because, again, Savard being a right-handed shot, it doesn't necessarily work. Ekholm is that guy to go for, but we know that asking price is incredibly high, and we don't even know if that team is necessarily going to sell. So that leaves you, a name on this list, for example, is an Alex Goligoski, which, just to take a really quick look at the numbers there, he's a decent offensive defenseman stopgap, but in terms of like a well-rounded nature, like obviously, and this was asked by a Rogue Pineapple on Discord as well, does the injury bring down Florida's playoff chances? I think the Panthers still make the playoffs. They're good enough that they can still make the playoffs and coached well enough. But what happens from here when you lose someone who was arguably having a Norris caliber season? I don't know what the answer is because, like you said, there is no replacing this person. It's just, can you find a stopgap that's good enough? And ultimately, if Ekholm's not on the market and you're looking at, again, for names that are out there, the Goligoskis of the world, from there, it's even another kind of tough call for who would be available. Mark Stahl. Bring Dimitri Khalikoff back to Florida. There's the answer. It's...
that's actually intriguing to bring Kulikov back. I don't know. I think it's possible. So the Panthers were doing, I know I didn't mention him when I was talking about depth, but they did move. So they had 7 defensemen dressed that night because of the Hornquist and Barkov injuries. And they put Riley Stillman on that top pairing with Weegar, and they didn't look bad.
Stillman last year in like limited action, from the analytics side at least, looked really good. I will say, Dimitri Khalikoff, though, again from the analytics perspective, is actually having a really good season with New Jersey. So maybe we cracked the code there, and maybe I don't know. Let's call our shot and say Dimitri Khalikoff or Kulikov back to Florida.
Yeah, he was a fan favorite in his time here. He was one of the very lone bright spots on the team until he was traded for Mark Pysyk. So, I don't know. It's certainly possible. And then again, obviously, I don't think we'll be getting Ekholm because let's talk about Nashville. Yeah. They have caught Chicago. They've won 7 of their last 10. Rocco Grimaldi somehow overcame the Tim Tebow curse with a 4-goal game.
Not the only 4-goal game of the week, though. Frickin' Andrew Kopp in Winnipeg had one too, which makes no sense.
Yeah,
whatsoever. But
it's nuts. People are just potting them left and right.
You talked about this last week, though, right? Like, who wants the spot less? Because we said, like, Carolina, Tampa, Florida, they are in, locked. But then you have Nashville, Chicago, Dallas, and Columbus. It's like they're tripping over each other to not make it into the playoffs.
Yeah. It's weird. Especially, of all those teams like Nashville, Chicago, Dallas, and Columbus, Nashville on paper going into the season had the best roster on paper.
I said they'd make the playoffs. I thought they could do it.
So I don't know. We'll see. Obviously, UC Saros figuring out how to play goalie again has been a huge part of that. He looked awful at the beginning of the season, and there have been times where he's looked like the best goalie in the league over the last few weeks. So Nashville, they finally have it together. I think they might no longer be sellers, which is very bizarre to think about.
You could argue if it would still be in their best interest to make that kind of move. But again, when you have their biggest competition, and no disrespect to Red Wings fans, we've talked about you all season long, you're garbage and you should be garbage. It's a good thing. But Chicago, Dallas, and Columbus, Nashville's competition for that 4th seed, all have won just 3 of their last 10. And obviously playing Nashville a bit, that's the factor into it. I don't know what Nashville does. I don't. Like, they're in a good situation where they're not desperate for draft picks. They have their own. In terms of expiring deals, I mean, yeah, you could sell Granlund, you could sell Holla, and then if you wanted to move Ekholm, which I think is an awful idea to begin with because he's still good. It's just, do they have that insulation, I guess? Because we'll talk about it too when the Bruins come up, because I keep getting asked, like, do the Bruins pull a New York Rangers and say, well, we're good enough to make the playoffs, but we won't make it there, so let's pull the chute and rebuild for 2 to 3 years? Which, for the record, no, the Bruins aren't in that role. But even Nashville, I mean, I think they're closer to the Rangers in that sense, where even if they sneak into the playoffs, is Nashville going to be able to hang with Carolina or Tampa? I don't know about that one. I think whoever makes the playoffs in that scenario, out of those 4 teams that we're looking at, is likely screwed. And yes, I know Chicago beat Edmonton last year. Columbus has upset Tampa, and Dallas made the Cup final last year. But you can't really have confidence in that 4th seed. I am incredibly intrigued, though, to see what Nashville does at this stage. I mean, like you said, could they make the playoffs? Sure. I mean, we got to remember that they still have Matt Duchene and Ryan Ellis on injured reserve right now. I don't know. I don't know what they do. I really don't. And then for Chicago, right, who they jump, I mean, with Dallas and Columbus, there aren't as many good talking points. I mean, how many times can we talk about, is Tortorella going to be fired? But with Chicago, it's interesting because, like the highlight of the week, I mean, Kevin Lankinen, hate to bring it out, but he shut out Florida, recently. They got Kirby Dach back from injury. And might as well shout it out too, Sod and Reddit. We've passed 3 years since Scott Foster was a thing. But for Chicago right now, I mean, is Kirby Dach enough to keep that team going? And is it in Chicago's best interest? The conversation isn't just who's good enough to make the playoffs. The conversation is also, is it then in their best interest to make the playoffs? I think you can argue for Nashville, Chicago, and Columbus, it is not in their best interest to make the playoffs. It's a much better idea for them to end up with a lottery pick. Whereas for Dallas, this is a team that was expected to make it back into the playoffs, and I think ending up with a lottery pick would be viewed as a failure.
Yeah. I think you're going to have a hard time finding a GM that thinks like that, though.
That is very true.
I think every GM, like, they think like, just give me a shot and we've got this thing. Like, I built this team. Like, I have faith in this team. And that's how I think that GMs think. And I think you'll have a hard time. Like, obviously it happens, but extremely rarely for a GM to backpedal. So I don't know. So the Central Division looks like we may have some answers by Friday as to which team wants this spot. We'll move to the East. Buffalo, it's all bad news. They lost 18 in a row now. We touched on this the other night.
18, man.
They blew that 3-0 lead to the Flyers. The good news, if you're a Buffalo fan, is that every single game has like a playoff atmosphere with the equivalent of you winning the playoffs is you winning a game. They also fired their in-arena host, because he's a fucking idiot. Like, I mean, why are you why does anybody, like, I don't care if you are legitimately a racist, right? You have to be such a dumb racist to make, like, I mean, obviously, like, racism, like obviously light bulb isn't on in the first place. But, you got to be such an idiot to make public remarks. Like, how are you not like, oh yeah, I can't publicly make that opinion. Like, you're not an evangelist. Like, this isn't your religion. Like, you're not like, I'm going to stand up for the Lord. This is like, I'm going to stand up for racism. Like, oh, Jesus. So he made remarks regarding Serena Williams, Halle Berry, and Gayle King. So I just want to celebrate these 3 real quick because I love all 3 of them so much. Serena Williams.
I mean, three black women you could target. Not that it's right to target anybody on any topic like this. But you think the internet isn't going to rise up to be like, you targeted Serena Williams, Halle Berry, and Gayle King. The stupidity is off the charts.
Like Serena Williams, arguably not just the greatest female tennis player of all time. She's the greatest tennis player of all time. Like if we're going by winnings, like she made $100 million playing tennis. That's insane. Favorite Serena Williams anecdote. Do you know who her husband is?
I do actually.
It's the guy who started it, which I really want to hear that meet cute. Like that's like I just want to know how they met and like what they talk about.
Oh god.
Halle Berry, type 1 diabetic. She obviously doesn't appear in a lot of events or talk about it much, but she was a hero of mine growing up for that. And then Gayle King, if you grew up like I did in the 90s and your mom watched a lot of Oprah, like you grew up to love Gayle because every single good Oprah anecdote, Gayle, right there, main character of the story. Like anytime Oprah lost her way, who was there? Gayle. Gayle, in some ways, is the Obi-Wan Kenobi to Oprah's Luke Skywalker. It's just like, how do you, like, I don't know. Like, obviously, you're the in-arena host. Like, you're an idiot. Like,
I'm gonna attack.
Why would you target three well-loved people?
I'm gonna attack Catwoman. Yeah, that movie sucked, but it's Halle Berry. Goddammit. Oh
Unreal.
Man, so it goes from bad to worse for Sabres fans. We'll spare you. I'll mention the Bruins here as well. Like I said, I had gotten some questions in regards to, do the Bruins pull the Rangers? And again, no. Like, do the Bruins have issues with their team? Yes. DeJ, I know you've seen the run sheet, so you have this answer. The Boston Bruins are bottom 5 in league scoring. I'm going to let that settle in for a second. The Boston Bruins have scored,
I mean, I think it makes sense,
the 5th least amount of goals. They have allowed the fewest with 73. They have scored 83. And it's just absurd. I mean, they have the second lowest goal differential at a +10. The lowest is Dallas at a +1, which is very bizarre. Like the league is the haves and the have-nots. For the record, Tampa and Colorado are both at +41s. They lost to the New Jersey Devils, which, you know, it's brutal. I mean, again, the Devils, they're not a great team. They're not abysmal. You have some bright spots, like Ty Smith is now in the lead for assist amongst rookies, passing Kaprizov, which is sick. The big thing, and Tuukka Rask Fan 40 brought this up on Discord, and it was mentioned on Twitter. The Bruins have played 5 games against New Jersey this year. They have 0 5-on-5 goals against the Devils. Yes, when they played New Jersey most recently, they had 2 called off goals. I would say rightfully so. It's incredibly frustrating that this team can't seem to find a way to beat New Jersey and the New York Islanders. It sucks. I hate it. It's brutal. And on the flip side here, really quickly, because NF Devils 25 mentioned this on Twitter, does Mackenzie Blackwood deserve the hype that Carter Hart got? And the answer is yes. And we'll talk about Carter Hart in a minute.
100%.
But Blackwood made some great saves in that game too. Like, yeah, the bottom line is for the Boston Bruins is, and I could talk about this all day, but I want to keep it short because I've been hitting on a lot of the same points for the majority of the season. For the Bruins, the defensive options of letting go of Krug and Chara, I don't think have been brutal. They've been without Brandon Carlo since the Tom Wilson hit. He's just getting back now. He should return this week, which is great. They are without Tuukka Rask, who hasn't been amazing this season anyway. But again, goaltending-wise, I'm still fairly confident. Everybody knows it's the same issue. You need secondary scoring, and they do not have it. Their lines on Cap Friendly, which was updated 2 minutes ago. You have Marchand, Bergeron, Pasternak, 34 points, 26 points, 27 points. Second line, Nick Ritchie, 17 and 31 is decent. David Krejci with 18 and 27. And then Craig Smith, 11 and 30. Their third line right now is Anders Bjork, 5 points. Charlie Coyle, 9 points, which he's been a pretty big disappointment. And then Zach Senyshyn, yes, the Matt Barzal draft Matt Senyshyn, who has no points in 3 games. Fourth line is Anton Bleed, no points in 3 games. Next to Trent Frederick, I love him. He has 5 points in 31 games. And Carson Kuhlman, who has 1 point in 8 games. Yes, you have injuries right now. You have scratches. I mean, you've been without Andre Kasha all season. Jake DeBrusk isn't in the lineup right now. He only has 7 points in 21 games anyway, if I'm not mistaken. They need secondary scoring. With this roster, though, do you pull a New York and pick pieces off of it? No, you can't. And if you can, the pieces you pick off of it, it starts with Patrice Bergeron, who's 35 years old. I'm sorry, you can't say let's strip this team down for 2 seasons, and then when Bergeron's 37, 38, we make our push for 2 to 3 more years. You cannot bank on Patrice Bergeron still having that much gas in the tank. Brad Marchand would be approaching 35. If you're saying that's done, you are saying the Bruins need to completely rebuild. And I don't think with that roster, they're at that stage yet. You had that 2 to 3 year rebuild a couple seasons ago in the aftermath of the failed 2013 Cup run, where Iginla had to go, Johnny Boychuk had to go, and they missed the playoffs for a couple of years. That was the time, and then they rebuilt. You ended up with David Pastrnak in that time. They were 1 game away from winning the Stanley Cup in 2019. This team, I think, call me delusional, still has a shot if you can pull off the big trade that they need. The question people have had is, well, what are the pieces they can even give up? And yeah, you leverage the future with the draft picks. I don't care if you give up a Jack Studnicka. I don't care if you give up an Urho Vakanainen. This is it. Like, you do not have too many more kicks at the can with Patrice Bergeron on this team. And the second that it becomes clear that we don't have a shot, you deal Bergeron to a contender, get what you can, and then get ready to suck for about 5 years. So at this stage, I'm not ready to say that this Bruins roster, and it's not out of, and Deej, let me know what you think about this. It's not out of rejecting reality. I genuinely think this team can still do damage in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, what this team lacks in scoring depth, it has in depth of defensively minded forwards. And I think that would be their strategy going into the playoffs. You know, I mean, you don't have to score 2 goals to win a game. You can win a game scoring 1 goal. And I mean, this team doesn't necessarily have the scoring depth, but it's defense wins championships.
So with that, we were going to move to the Philadelphia Flyers anyway. I will say this breaking news. The Flyers have placed defenseman Shane Gostisbehere on waivers. I'll be intrigued.
Oh, what? Really?
Yes. When you talk about a left-handed defenseman, maybe, just maybe, the Florida Panthers are interested here.
Not just the lefty.
I have to look at the cap numbers here for these particular teams, but in terms of an offensive defenseman,
it's not good.
Maybe this is where the Panthers look, because Gostisbehere's numbers says he could defensively. No, we all know this, but offensively, he can still contribute, especially if you insulate him on a Florida team that is better than Philadelphia, better coached. No disrespect to Alain Vigneault. I mean, Gostisbehere is making $4.5 for the next 2 years after this. I mean, again,
yeah,
we've seen so many people say, like, oh, this guy's on waivers, someone should take a shot. Current cap space for the Cats right now is $9.5 million. Their deadline cap space is listed at 14.6. They can 1,000% afford Shane Gostisbehere. 1,000%. So maybe that is the answer. We'll find out. That said,
I mean,
go ahead.
The issue is that Ekblad's or Barkov's contract's up next year.
Fair.
That's why, like, if it was just for this year or just next year, sure.
I mean, I'm sure you could.
But I don't know. I don't think we can fit that.
To salvage the season, though, do you find a way to get rid of Anton Strawman, who's making almost 4.5, but is a UFA at the end of next year?
I don't know.
I guess underrated aspect, too, is Scott Darling has a buyout over the next 2 years after this, and Luongo's still on the books. Although Scott Darling, his buyout drops from $2.3 million to $1.1 next year. So they do have money to play with in Florida, despite the Bobrovsky deal. I think they could make it work. I do. Time will tell, though. Just something interesting to keep an eye on. We might just be, speculating a bit too much. Barkov's deal is up after next season. So I think they could make it work personally, but I could understand why you'd be concerned that he's locked up until, 2022, 2023. That's it.
Yeah.
Unless you have another take. Shall we transition to the Panthers?
No, I don't. I was just looking over the Flyers and the Carter Hart nightmare season.
Yeah, so it's funny that we were going to talk about the Flyers anyway. I don't know where to start with this because, again, it's weird for me because, again, I predicted the Philadelphia Flyers to make the Stanley Cup. And
yeah, we did.
I don't think anybody could have predicted that this team would be this bad. From a defensive standpoint, from a goaltending standpoint, from a coaching standpoint. And it is shocking to me that Alain Vigneault hasn't been fired. Because with him not being fired at this stage, I'm sorry, I don't think they can bank on the Bruins, going in a downward spiral. I don't think that's something you can bank on. So at this stage, I mean, to me, it's, well, do you want to salvage your season? Fire Alain Vigneault and try something else. Otherwise, you're waving the white flag on this season, and I don't know what happens for Philadelphia next at that stage. I mean, if you want to save some of those big offseason moves, feel free, but I mean, hey, maybe it'll work out because how much money can Carter Hart demand this offseason as an RFA if things keep going this way? So, yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things, Deej, and I'm sure you agree when it comes to what the issue is with this team. I think everything is the answer. Just something has gone wrong with this team.
Yeah. I don't know what you do. Statistically and by expected saves, Carter Hart's the worst goalie in the league right now. I don't know. I don't know what you do. I don't know how you turn this around. I don't understand how you don't make the easy move of getting rid of Alain Vigneault. He hasn't brought anything to this team that makes him worth not firing at this point. I don't know. Fire him, hire anybody. I don't know what you even blame. I mean, the team is performing so heavily below expectations. I feel like you blame the coaching, right? If a team is playing above their expectations, you say, oh, well, they're being very well coached. If a team is playing below their expectations, you say, well, what went wrong? And it's the coach. So, I don't know what you do here. I mean, Brian Elliott, thank God, has somehow looked competent this year. I mean, he hasn't looked amazing, but he's looked competent. And you know what? This is really interesting. I was talking with one of my friends about this when they said, what do you think went wrong this year? And you know what? The one piece that to me was the butterfly flapping its wings to make the hurricane or whatever, Matt Niskanen suddenly retiring when the Flyers were expecting him to be on the roster this year causes you to shift all of your defensive pairings around.
Yeah, I mean,
if I had to guess, that's why everything fell apart is poor coaching because you're not able to coach around the loss of Niskanen, and then Niskanen just throwing all your defensive pairs into a blender on a team that already had a lot of question marks on defense other than Niskanen and what's his name? He's so good. God, I'm getting old, man. Things just disappear. Yeah, Provorov. Yeah.
So, Kofster asked us on Patreon, what's more to blame for the current struggles? The goalies, the defense, team defense, coaching, and who would you call up? Again, I mean, yeah, there are younger players you could give opportunities to. Yet, I mean, at the very least, you have to look at coaching, right? It's the Calgary thing. What's wrong with this team? Well, shit. If Daryl Sutter can't fix it, it's the team. We'll make changes with the team. Like that's how NHL teams operate. It's we are gonna hold on to the last possible second and give the team as many chances as possible because it's easier to find a coach and a new GM than it is to build a new team. It's just that simple. So again, for the moment, I'm sorry, it falls on Vigneault at this stage. You have on paper a Stanley Cup caliber team where your goaltending has been abysmal. Shout out to Sam Morin for getting his first career NHL goal, but I don't think the plan was a now third pairing that's not a thing anymore, but Sam Morin and Shane Gostisbehere are listed as the third pairing on Cap Friendly right now with Eric Gustafsson as a scratch. So I don't know what's up with that. There's just a lot to it. And then again, obviously the big thing to focus on, is Carter Hart. And Girl with a Top Hat mentioned it on Discord. Have the Flyers ruined Carter Hart? I don't think he's ruined. We don't know, right? I mean, it's a season like this can be damaging. Hart has been scratched. And the word was that he has been given a break. Like he's going to be just specifically practicing and trying to get things going and get them back on track. But it might not just be an issue of Carter Hart needs to tweak a few things with his game. It could be an everyone issue. So it's a brutal situation in Philadelphia right now. It's a shocking situation. You look up and down the standings. I mean, again, Dallas outside of the playoffs. That's pretty shocking. This is the biggest surprise in the NHL is that the Philadelphia Flyers are bad. -17 goal differential. Like they are bad. I mean, if I were to tell you, hey, 36 games in for Chicago, 34 for Philadelphia, that Philly would have a worse goal differential than Chicago, who started the season with Malcolm Subban and Colin Delia as your goalies and without Jonathan Toews. If I were to tell you that, would you have believed me? Like it was almost inconceivable that the Flyers were going to be this bad this year.
Yeah. I don't know. It's too difficult. There's so much going wrong at once that it's almost impossible to pinpoint it. And so, I mean, the reason you go to coaching is because that's, the one X factor that affects every part of the team. So speaking of the Flyers being god awful, Mika Zibanejad is just having a field day against those orange jerseys.
So screw you to everybody that dropped him in fantasy, apparently, because the Rangers have notably kicked the hell out of Philadelphia for the most part. Fun fact, the Rangers now have a +15 goal differential, despite being on the outside looking into the playoffs, which is absurd. So, yeah, shout out to Mika Zibanejad for losing a lot of people some money. And Dusty Dangles asked this on Discord, and I thought it was worth bringing up. Why is Adam Fox not talked about for the Norris? And obviously, Adam Fox had a great highlight this week. Had 3 saves on an empty net for Philly in the game that they ended up. Ultimately, it was a 2-1 final in that particular game. I mean, when it comes to Adam Fox, I think the issue is, right? Like, I know he's still so new. It's just his second season. But I think for those in the know, it's almost redundant to call Adam Fox great because Adam Fox is phenomenal. So I can understand for Rangers fans why it would be frustrating. I think it's also a factor of obviously, again, they're not a playoff team right now. And he's been overshadowed by certain events, right? He has. Artemi Panarin has absolutely overshadowed everything with the Rangers this year. Lafreniere and Capo Caco and their struggles at times. That has overshadowed Adam Fox. It is so much easier to look at the negatives than it is to focus on the positives, especially from an outside perspective. The average fan looks at the Rangers. It's not going to be like, yeah, Adam Fox is sick. Oh, and these issues. It's going to be, well, look at this issue, this issue, this issue. before you talk about the good. So, my opinion, at least.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly the reason. Is there's too much going on, and I feel like in order to get a Norris mention, you have to have your team has to be stable. I don't know why that seems to be a requirement, but it is for whatever reason.
So we had, unless you have any other point there, not to cut you off.
No, I don't. Yeah.
So quickly then, Pittsburgh as well. Now it's a team that we don't necessarily have a ton to talk about, but I wanted to give them a quick shout out because as per usual, Deej, they're dealing with 1,000 injuries, mainly the star players, and somehow, as per usual, again, they continue to win. They have been on a fantastic hot streak at this stage, winning 7 of their last 10. They've won 4 in a row. And yeah, when the big guns are down, someone like Radim Zohorna steps in and scores his first NHL goal on his first shot. Again, we already shouted out Sam Morin, but Keegan Kolesar in Vegas and Logan Stanley in Winnipeg also scored their first goals of their career this week. But, you know, Pittsburgh's another one of those teams, right? Kind of like with the Bruins. I talked about it. They're not at that stage where you say, nope, we're done. They're at the stage where you keep going. They don't have their first round pick, obviously, because of Kasperi Kapanen. But it's been a joke forever that with the Penguins, it's Crosby, it's Malkin, it's a couple of the good guys, and then it's Sam Lafferty and Frederick Goodrow and Anthony Angelo. And somehow, some way, it just keeps working. Although I think the word was Tristan Jarry might be roughed up. Don't quote me on that. But hey, they'll survive. And Casey DeSmith, who quietly, Casey DeSmith has played in 13 games this year. You care to guess Casey DeSmith's save percentage? Just a shot in the dark.
I don't know. I mean, the Penguins have been playing good enough that I'd say it's probably above average. Is he above 910?
He is, with a 191 goals against average. He has a 229 save percentage. This is a guy they buried in the AHL last year because they had Matt Murray and Tristan Jarry. And 29-year-old Casey DeSmith, who a lot of people, you can look up the controversial history of Casey DeSmith. We're not talking about that at the moment. But, yeah, shout out to Casey DeSmith, who's absolutely killing it right now. And the Penguins are doing what the Penguins do. Deej, only a couple more talking points. We have 2 divisions left. Where are we heading?
We'll head to the West before we touch on the North. I feel like we gave the North a lot of attention at the beginning there. So let's give the West some love.
Although I do want to quickly shout out the Shane Gostisbehere deal. The average is 4.5, but the contract was front loaded. So maybe some of the teams that aren't exactly as rich are like, hey. So I'm really intrigued by that. And hopefully by Friday, we're talking about an interesting move. That said, you want to talk about the West?
Detroit.
Dude, if I'm Detroit, I take Shane Gostisbehere right now.
Yeah, let's talk about the West.
Oh my God. I absolutely take Shane Gostisbehere.
He's in the car. He's already in the car.
There have been some dudes on waivers this year that I can't believe Detroit haven't claimed for the sake of them trying to flip. I know it's not real life isn't a video game, but Steve Yzerman is the type to do that. And Detroit is, fun fact, I think 4th on the waiver wire right now, behind Buffalo, Anaheim, and Ottawa. So I don't know. Maybe not. Buffalo, what are you doing? Although you have cap issues. The Western Division. The big talking point here. My adopted team, the Colorado Avalanche, eater of worlds, 8-0-2 in their last 10. And Deej, I know you've seen the stat. Philip Grubauer became the fastest goaltender in Avs/Nordiques history to reach the 20-win mark in a season. He did it in 27 games. Patrick Waugh did it in 30 in 2000-2001, the year that won the Cup. It is also his 99th career regular season win. He is a UFA at the end of the year. Philip Grubauer is about to get paid. We talked about him last week. Philip Grubauer is insane. I'm happy for the guy. I mean, again, I think it was Architect that mentioned like, oh yeah, I think Washington maybe regrets letting him go. Yeah, I mean, the talk of, hey, who the goalie in Washington could be, Vanacek or Samsonov. Turns out it probably should have been Grubauer, and more people will be talking about you as Cup favorites.
Yeah, I think, gosh, he's looking at Kyle Dubas's wallet and licking his chops. Philip Grubauer. I don't know. I mean, there's not a lot of teams. I mean, maybe the Ducks are a good fit because there's just not a lot of teams that would be able to afford what I'm sure the goalie market will rebound to this upcoming offseason. And be in the market for a starter.
If John Gibson were to be traded, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, for Colorado, though, the issue is he's staying. Like they will back up the Brinks truck for this guy because they really don't have another choice. You're not going to rely on Pavel Francouz to be the guy. You can't bank on Adam Werner or Justus Anuin to be the guy. Like they don't have that surefire guy in the system. So rest assured, I'd be willing to bet a decent amount of money on it that Philip Grubauer is with Colorado next year. That said, really, Deej, the only other talking point, it's kind of a mix between Arizona and St. Louis. You talk about divisions that we thought might be wrapped up. The Coyotes are making a push, and St. Louis is in a really rough spot. Coyotes with 4 wins in their last 10, but St. Louis with just 2 in their last 10. Phil Kessel with a hat trick, a natural hat trick this week for the Yotes. And for the Blues now, you have rumors of Mike Hoffman being dealt, maybe in a deal for Taylor Hall. And Pierre LeBrun said this, hearing the initial asking price.
Yeah, he was scratched.
Yeah, Hoffman was scratched, right? LeBrun said this, though, hearing the initial asking price for Hall involves a first-round pick. You know, I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense for the Blues to be like, oh, yeah, Mike Hoffman in a first for Taylor Hall on a rental? Doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense to me, personally, but it just kind of goes to show that there's a lot of question marks around the Blues right now and just what the hell is going on. And it's a bad look, all things considered, for the Blues. I mean, not saying it's Binnington's fault, but you hand Binnington this new contract, and now all of a sudden, again, this team's trending downward. I don't know what necessarily happens with the Blues. I mean, we said start of the year, Vegas, Colorado, St. Louis, locked. It's between Minnesota and Arizona. And then we're like, oh, Arizona's out, but maybe LA. And now the Coyotes are fighting back. And it's St. Louis of all teams that look like they're in a bit of trouble.
I mean, even San Jose weirdly has a long shot at this playoff spot right now.
Erik Karlsson keeps playing like he did last night. Good God.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's wide open, and the Blues don't want it.
There's a lot of teams that just...
So, I mean, you see Los Angeles is making trades, you know? It's weird. They're loading up.
Brendan Lemieux. He's the guy.
They're ready to commit some penalties.
Yeah.
They're good to go. They're ready to break the rules.
Breaking all the rules. The bad boys are back in Los Angeles.
Oh, fantastic. So, yeah, I don't know. And then why do you scratch Hoffman if you're not trying to deal him? Or, like, is Hoffman really playing that bad?
I mean, Mike Hoffman's that guy. You know this. He played for your team where it's either he scores or he doesn't do anything, and he hasn't been scoring.
Scores or snores.
So yeah, it's been interesting in that way for him, where it's just what the hell's happening there.
Yeah, so we'll touch on the North Division. Let me start with my Oilers. They've had a really busy week. They went 1-0-1. They played 2 games against the Leafs. Both went to overtime, and both were phenomenal viewing experiences for a hockey fan.
I like phenomenal because it's phenomenal, but then you have their defense, which is an abomination.
Abominable.
Well, Garber asked it on Discord, what's the blame more at Edmonton, defense or goaltending? And we covered it at the top of the show. It's clearly the defense.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Smith's having a good year.
It's the weirdest thing, man. Like, we've talked about it on bonus shows, not to cut you off and overpower you here, but we talked about it on bonus shows like, oh, man, like the NFL, there's so many storylines. And we'll be talking about baseball on the bonus show this week, too. But in the NHL, there are stories, absolutely. And how Mike Smith has a .919 save percentage? I will never know.
Yeah. Willpower.
Willpower.
Faith.
Old man stubbornness.
So I don't know. Not a lot to talk about with Edmonton. Obviously we touched on their defensive woes, but they're making that push. The split with Toronto obviously doesn't help, but they may come away as the North Division champions in a week or two. We'll see, especially now that it appears that Toronto have gotten their groove back. Toronto, they had that they were down 3-1 the first game I watched. They came back, won 4-3 in overtime. So I don't know. There's still a lot to do in the North Division, and then obviously we need to touch on Vancouver's winning streak. Vancouver now tied with Calgary in points percentage, because if there is anything left to do for Vancouver this season, it's to get a worse draft pick. That'll just really put a nice bow on this absolute turd of a year. Is to rally out of a great pick.
That was the question. 6 wins in their last 10. Is it too little, too late? Yes. Yes, it is.
But it's also too much, too late.
If you really think about it, yeah. Oh God.
So this North Division's interesting. But still not a lot of stories. Obviously, Toronto's starting to find their groove again. The Frederik Andersen thing we touched on. And we've got a fantastic little 3-horse race here.
Yeah. So again, the story of the NHL continues to evolve. I think that pretty much does it here for us in the first show of 2 this week. Again, we'll be back closer to the weekend to try and hopefully stay up to date. So I look forward, Deej, to seeing what happens tonight or on Wednesday in the NHL that we wouldn't have get to talk about had we stuck to 1 show a week. Although now that we have moved to 2, this Friday show is going to be boring and half an hour long. It's going to be nothing to talk about, all things considered. Sat here, though, and tried to get the talking points for today lower, and here we are. Thank God we didn't have a guest. It would be a 4-hour podcast. With that, of course, again, our bonus show up every week on Patreon, patreon.com/Tougie24. Of course, the YouTube is there, the Twitch channel, and of course, you've been able to see it on screen this whole time. You can follow me on Twitter @Tougie24, on Instagram as well. Deej is at DEJ1088. We will see you all later this week. Deej, your parting thoughts from the mystical bluish void that you've been emanating from this entire podcast.
Well, so I had Gail King's Wikipedia article in the background, obviously. And so I just would like to bring up Gail King's personal life. From 1982 to 1993, King was married to an attorney named Bill Bumpus. And with Bill Bumpus, King has a daughter, Kirby Bumpus, and a son, Bill Bumpus Jr. Names, that is all-time great nomenclature right there. Those are some of the greatest names I've ever heard.
Good old William Bumpus. Jesus.
Old Billy Bumpus Jr. and Kirby Bumpus. Good night, everybody. See you on Friday.